నా పేరు కిరణ్ కుమార్. నేను దాసు భాషితం సహ వ్యవస్థాపకుని. ఈరోజు ఏప్రిల్ ఫూల్స్ డే. మీ సంగతి ఏమో కానీ చిన్నప్పుడు ఈ రోజున అందరినీ ఫూల్ చేయాలని నేను తెగ సంబరపడేవాడిని. కానీ ప్రతిరోజు మనల్ని చేసేది మన మనస్సు. దాసు భాషితం లక్ష్యం మీ సమగ్ర శ్రేయస్సుకు సోపానం అవ్వడం. అందులో ముఖ్యమైన సోపానం మనల్ని మనం అర్థం చేసుకోగలటం. ఈ విషయంలో సైన్స్ ఏం చెప్తుందో అనే కుతూహలం నాకు ఉండింది. యాదృచ్ఛికంగా అశోక యూనివర్సిటీ వాళ్ళది హౌ టు చేంజ్ లైఫ్ కోర్స్ నాకు కంటబడింది. వెంటనే జాయిన్ అయ్యాను. కోర్సులో భాగంగా బిహేవియర్ సైన్స్ లో ఎన్నో విస్మయపరిచే అంశాలు తెలిసాయి. వాటిలో కొన్ని మనతో పంచుకోవడానికి ఈరోజు మా ప్రొఫెసర్ శ్రీ పవన్ మామిడి గారు మనతో ఉన్నారు. శ్రీ పవన్ మామిడి బిహేవియరల్ సైన్స్, లా, పాలసీ రంగాల్లో మేనేజ్మెంట్, పాలసీ విద్యార్థులకు ఉపాధ్యాయునిగాను, ఎన్నో ప్రముఖ కంపెనీలకు పాలసీ విషయంలో సీనియర్ అడ్వైజర్ గాను పనిచేస్తున్నారు. ప్రస్తుతం అశోక విశ్వవిద్యాలయంలోని సెంటర్ ఫర్ సోషల్ అండ్ బిహేవియరల్ చేంజ్ విభాగానికి డైరెక్టర్గా పనిచేస్తున్నారు. నీతి ఆయోగ్కు వీరు సలహాదారు. బిహేవియరల్ సైన్స్ పై భారతదేశంలో కృషి చేసిన తొలి వ్యక్తుల్లో పవన్ ముఖ్యులు. ఎన్నో రాష్ట్రాల ప్రభుత్వాలకు వారి విద్యా విధానంలో ఉపయోగించుకునేందుకు పవన్ బిహేవియరల్ సైన్స్ పై ఎన్నో ఇన్సైట్స్ అందించారు. యూనివర్సిటీ ఆఫ్ ఆక్స్ఫర్డ్ నుంచి పిహెచ్డి, హార్వర్డ్ లా స్కూల్ నుండి లాలో మాస్టర్స్, ఉస్మానియా యూనివర్సిటీ నుంచి మ్యాథమెటిక్స్ లో వీరు పట్టాలు పొందారు. శ్రీ పవన్ తెలంగాణ వారు. వారికి తెలంగాణ వంటలు అంటే మక్కువ. ముఖ్యంగా పచ్చిమిర్చి కారం అంటే ఆయనకు మహా ఇష్టం. హీ బిలీవ్స్ ఇట్ ఈస్ గుడ్ ఫర్ ద సోల్ అండ్ ఇట్ బిల్డ్స్ క్యారెక్టర్. కానీ పవన్ గారు తరగతులన్నీ ఆంగ్ల మాధ్యమంలోనే చెప్పారు. ఆయన వీలైనంత వరకు తెలుగు మాట్లాడతారు. వారికి సౌకర్యంగా ఉండే భాషల్లోనే మాట్లాడమని నేను కోరాను. ప్రసంగానికి 1 గంట, ప్రశ్నోత్తరాలకి 30 నిమిషాలు కేటాయించాము. మధ్యలో మీకు ప్రశ్నలు అడగాలనిపిస్తే చాట్లో అడగండి. సమయానుకూలంగా పవన్ గారి దృష్టి తీసుకొస్తాము. పవన్ సార్, థ్యాంక్ యూ సో మచ్ ఫర్ కమింగ్ అండ్ ద ప్లాట్ఫామ్ ఇస్ యువర్స్.
Thanks, Kiran garu. This is a great honor for me because this is the first time I'm actually representing my own co-linguistic ethnic. So it is an honor, although paradoxically I'm speaking in English. నా తెలుగు అంత అంటే మీరు మాట్లాడిన తర్వాత నేను తెలుగులో మాట్లాడానంటే నాకు భయం వేస్తుంది. The purity of your language is extraordinary, so I will not even, you must forgive me, నన్ను క్షమించాలి. ఇంతవరకు నేను అంటే మాట్లాడతాను, అంటే నేను నా తెలంగాణ భాషలో మాట్లాడితే చాలా మంది పరిగెత్తిపోతారు. అందుకనే సో you must bear with me. You must bear with my limited Telugu education, which is a very big gap in my life. But I will, with the company of people like you, I hope to learn as I go forward. Today, what I want to do is discuss behavior science, which is the application of psychology in understanding human decision making and why we make decisions which are not often very good for ourselves sometimes. So the reason why it is an interesting subject is we end up behaving irrationally as against rational, and that brings us the question as to what rationality is. Rationality, Kiran garu, what do you say? What is the equivalent word for it in Telugu andi?
Hetubaddhata. Hetubaddhata.
Okay, so the expectation that we are rational and that is a sort of a very mathematical expectation indeed. And for instance, so what is rationality? Rationality is defined as being almost very quantitative, very precise, very very logical in the way we think, and that we will do this all the time, and that is the fundamental problem. So the whole world of economics, the subject undo, it was based on an assumption that human beings behave in a very rational manner. that they will behave in a very almost like automatons, like robots, that when they are presented with a problem situation, that they will break it down systematically and then they will make decisions. But as you know, human beings are not like that. We always end up making irrational decisions. We make emotional decisions. We make intuitive decisions. We come to conclusions very quickly. And we also are persuaded by human emotions such as love, respect, sacrifice, all of which somehow rationality has not captured. And that is the fundamental challenge. So when economists building a human science purely on the basis of rationality, I'll give you one example, sir. So mathematics lo manamu 10th class lo chadutam endante the principle of transitivity. If A is greater than B and B is greater than C, we assume that A is greater than C. Simple. It's called the principle of transitivity. But let us try and apply it in our real world decision making. I might like bananas more than mangoes and mangoes more than oranges. But in life, I might actually prefer oranges over bananas. So there is an inconsistency in the way I make choices from a purely logical point of view. And that has very serious implications in the way that we construct the price system in economics. So these are the sort of the anomalies. These are the sort of the systematic deviations from our understanding of rationality that is really interesting, right? But here is the very key point, the first point that I would like to make, and that is, let us take a very fast runner like Usain Bolt. He runs very fast in a race. చాలా వేగంగా పరిగెత్తారు. కానీ లైఫ్ అంతా అదే రేట్లో పరిగెత్తాడు కాదు. He also walks sometime in his house. Merely because we have the capacity to do something in a very precise, in a very laborious manner, it doesn't mean that we do it all the time. And economists have made this fundamental mistake that because human beings are capable of rationality, that they are rational all the time. And that assumption has led to the construction of a lot of bad economics. And that's where, some psychologists came and said, you're constructing this whole science of human behavior, how they make purchase decisions, how they, buy homes, or how they engage in transactions, vyaparam ela chestaru. On the basis of this view that they're very precise, mathematically oriented decision makers. And that was found to be deeply problematic. They said, no, this is one of the reasons why we are not able to predict so many things in society. One of the reasons why so many of our policies are going wrong in our society is because we have a fundamentally mistaken and a flawed system structure. So we have to change it. So how do we change it? We change it by going back to the square one and saying, how do people actually really behave in the real world? So moving away from the world of mathematics to the real world became the transition. And so how do you move from the world of mathematics to the real world? You have to become an empirical social scientist, a scientist who goes to the field and studies real behavior. Behavior of people in the villages, behavior of people in the tribal areas, behavior of people in their households, behavior of people in a bus when it is rush, when it is crowded, or behavior of people in a variety of circumstances. So we need to go out and actually study that. And from that, we should construct a science that is based on experience rather than the armchair of mathematics. That was the fundamental shift on matter. And this shift happened fundamentally because of a couple of psychologists, great psychologists, one of whom, his name is Daniel Kahneman. He's a professor of psychology at Princeton University. And he's a remarkable person because he was born in Israel. And I think he also had some experience with Nazi Germany and he escaped that. And then subsequently, he found his way to America as a child and he became a professor of psychology. at Princeton University. Now, this is a very interesting thing, and the interesting thing is, here is a psychologist who's looking at the world of economics. And economics people are very, very sharp, they're mathematically minded. So it took an outsider from a field to challenge the edifice of economics. And he said, a lot of what you've done is really wrong. You need to do experiments, you need to go out, collect data from the real world to construct how humans behave. So a lot of behavioral science then became a part of economics, called the behavioral revolution, and then it also became a part of the policy imagination. A lot of governments started adopting, hey, we have been applying economics very blindly, but maybe behavioral economists have something interesting. So the first nudge unit and start చేశారండి in the government of UK, based on a wonderful book called Nudge, written by Nobel Prize winner Richard Taylor and Cass Sunstein, a professor of law now who is at Harvard Law School. In Nudge ane pustakam anedi, it became very, very influential. The government in the UK said, this is wonderful, let us adopt it. It became a playbook for policymakers. So they started the Nudge unit in UK. And then subsequently, all other countries started adopting it. So in about 5-6 years ago, when you opened the OECD map of nudge units in the world, only 2 countries were missing. One was India and the other was China. So that's where we started our ambition. That's where we started our journey. And, founders like Pramod Sinha garu, dan tarvata Archana Vyas garu, who's at BMGF, and then appudu Amitabh Kant garu undedi ekkadante Niti Aayoglo. We all got together and then we said, this is a good time for us to institutionalize psychological thinking in public policy and not just apply economics blindly. అప్పుడు మేము ఈ యూనిట్ ఏదైతే స్టార్ట్ చేసాం. సో there are 3 units, 3 elements to this unit అండి. One is the government, which is Niti Aayog, where we have about 10 people now sitting there. Then one unit is, of course, one element is, of course, Ashoka University. Then the third one is BMGF, Gates Foundation. So it's a triangle of these entities which has facilitated the socialization of behavior science within the government. That was the first experiment. And then subsequently we started it in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar as well. So the BMGF gives us the resources to do research, to go out into the field, as I said, to discover reality. Ashoka University gives us the science, and Niti Aayog gives us the problems. So it's a marriage between 3 units, 3 entities made in heaven. So this is how we started. And the kind of problems that we engage with are typically, they typically deal with human irrationality. I'll give you one quick example of how human beings can be irrational, or it could be due to a lack of opportunities and therefore a lack of awareness. So let us take one of the dominant reasons why little children die of diarrhea in this country. There's a great economist called Cyril Mullainathan at the University of Chicago. We all have mental models. A mental model is, we have a particular structure of the world in our mind. And that structure dominates the way we construct the world. The world is real, but we also construct it in our mind. There are 2. There is the objective and there is the subjective. The objective is one thing, but subjectively మనం ఎలా దాన్ని construct చేస్తాం అనేది. So the world is not merely something that exists independent of us, but it's also something that exists in our mind, and we are the architects of that world. So a mental model is a byproduct of that architecture that we use in our brain. So let's go back to that example of little children dying because of diarrhea. So the mental model of rural parents is that it is like a box. A little child is like a system anukondi. And diarrhea is basically the emission of liquids. All liquids are going, it's like a leak. At the end of our mental model is, if there is a leak, first thing is we turn the water off. We don't let any water get into the system. Now, that is the most dangerous thing to do, because our mental model is now making us do something which is grossly irrational. And that's one of the reasons why most children in this country, they die due to dehydration. So here is an existing irrational mental model that leads to death. This is an example. I'll give you another example. The other example is that of exclusive breastfeeding and nutritional, child nutrition. When you have a child between the ages of 0 months to 6 months, mothers are expected to give them only the nutrition of breast milk, because that is considered to be the most powerful nutrition for the child. But there are any number of social norms which dictate that give the little child తేనె కొంచెం చెంచులో పెట్టి నోట్లో పెడతాం, లేకపోతే వాటర్ ఇవ్వటం, సమ్మర్ టైంలో వాటర్ ఇస్తారు. ఆర్ మన దగ్గర కొన్ని సెరమనీస్ అవుతాయి. అట్లీస్ట్ మా మహబూబ్నగర్లో, as soon as the child is born, you feed the child with a variety of other things, right? And that is one of the most dangerous things that you can do, because the sources of diarrhea for a newborn child comes from the water that you give the newborn child. And what you are doing is, you're denying the child an inheritance. Mother's milk is not merely nutrition, it is an inheritance. In much the same way that we inherit a home or land or money from our parents, mother's milk is the most precious inheritance that we can get. And somehow we are substituting that with, for instance, products that we get in the market and so on, which is not a good idea. Now, this is a form of irrational behavior. It's a form of irrationality that comes not because people are stupid or because they are less intelligent. It's because of certain social norms that we have. So now, how do we get parents to ensure that the little children are fed only breast milk? How do we create that messaging? And chala important. So, we are developing different techniques. Maybe I can show you a video of the messaging that we are using, which is behaviorally designed. I can maybe at some point in the discussion we can do that. Yeah, so this is sort of a background of who we are, what we do. But next, I want to introduce another important concept, and this concept relates to two ways in which the human brain works. So I don't know, Miru. I don't know how many of you do yoga. There is a realization that some of us have, that when we breathe through our nose, the rate at which we breathe air through either of the two nostrils is actually different between the two nostrils. I don't know if many of you have noticed this. అంటే ఒక నాస్ట్రిల్ నుంచి ఫాస్ట్ గా పీలుస్తాము, ఇంకో నాస్ట్రిల్ నుంచి అంత ఫాస్ట్ గా పీలువు. And oftentimes we go through life thinking that this difference is because of some congestion that we may have or some cold that we have. Actually, that's not true. The brain basically sends a signal to the nose, which enlarges or decreases the size of the tissue inside, which enlarges the pathway or decreases the pathway, thereby changing the rate at which air is taken in. So it's almost a deliberate evolutionary inheritance of matter. Physiological. It's called physiological bilateralism, and it's a medical phenomenon. It's called it's a cycle. It's a breathing cycle. It's a way that in which we can, for instance, if we breathe very fast through one nostril, smoke undankondi, we can run away from the smoke because it's dangerous. You can sample it very quickly and you need the information quickly and you can react accordingly. But a slower pace of breathing can also facilitate, savoring food, savoring of what is nutritious, and so on and so forth. Right? So there's a different purpose, that the different rates at which your nose breathes in air, that it's a function that it serves. It's an evolutionary function. This is an example of how the human body is fundamentally asymmetrical. It's not symmetrical fundamentally. And this asymmetry is also found in other organs. I mean, one organ is the brain, the way in which it thinks. So there are two types of systems of thinking. One is called systems 1 and the other is called systems 2. Let me explain what I mean by systems 1 and systems 2. These are the two different methods of thinking. In systems 1, ఒకవేళ మీరు మీ బ్యాక్ యార్డ్ లోకి వెళ్తారు, గార్డెన్ అనుకోండి, అక్కడ మీరు యు సీ a curved object which looks like a sine wave. Immediate ga మీరు భయపడి మీరు you retract, because your brain thinks that it is a snake. Any wavy object lying on the ground, your brain is it's a reptilian brain gada. It's an evolutionarily inherited instinct to think that it is a snake, and you retract. Now, let us analyze this decision that you have taken almost very quickly. If you were to look at it rationally, the likelihood of sinusoidal objects lying on the ground being a snake are very, very, very low. Very low. The likelihood of a snake being poisonous is even lower. In other words, the probability of you being in danger is so low, and yet you react in this almost violent manner of retracting. Right? So your decision is almost disproportionate to the minusculity of the danger that you face. That form of decision making, which is very quick, which is almost unthinking, which is intuitive, is called systems 1. Any decision that you take very quickly, very intuitively, very emotionally, very suddenly, without thinking all that very much, where the cognitive load, the investment that you have made, is very low. Yeah, that is called systems 1. Let me just switch my WhatsApp off. It keeps sending a lot of. Now, let's go into systems 2. Systems 2 is a decision making which happens more slowly, more rationally, where your brain is actually working very hard to come up with a decision. In systems 1, it's very quick, it's very emotional. Let us say I ask you to think about what is 2 plus 2. Your systems 1 will immediately, without even calculating it, because you have seen it so many times, you will recall it from your brain and put it out there and say it's 4. Right? But let us say I ask you to calculate 3, 4, 5, 6 multiplied by 7, 8, 9, 2. And I were to ask you, I mean, unless you are Shakuntala Devi Garu, you will not be able to arrive at that conclusion very quickly. You will need to engage in a systems 2 way of arriving at that decision. Right? So now, so you have two rates at which you arrive at decisions. One is systems 1 and systems 2. Let me give you another example. This is an example that I often use in my classroom. And for those of you who are engineers or mathematicians, you might find it interesting. Kiran Garu, you must forgive me because I've repeated this in your class several times. Excuse the boredom that this will cause. Imagine there are 2 railway tracks, steel railway tracks, each one 1 kilometer long. They are lying adjacent to each other in a straight line. Now imagine during summer that these railway tracks expand by 1 centimeter each. కొద్దిగా gap వస్తుంది. And because a gap వచ్చినందువల్ల, the rail tracks bump up a little bit like this. So they form a triangle. Now, if I were to ask you, without taking out your pen and paper, all the engineers, mathematicians, and if I were to ask you, well, how much do you think these 2 tracks jump up? What would your answer be? How many of you would say it is less than 5 centimeters? Why don't you just raise your hands to acknowledge this? 5 centimeters. Yeah? Okay, so the bunch of people who think that it is below 5. In and around 1 centimeter, how many of you would you think it is the case? There's some more. Now, okay. So in any classroom, about 75 to 80% would say, ఏదో minuscule amount raise కావచ్చు అని ఒక అంచనా వేస్తాం. But if you were to now apply systems 2, that's your systems 1 telling you that it's around 1 centimeter. Why? Because it just expanded by 1 centimeter and therefore it should just be in that proximate area. If you were to actually calculate it using a simple Pythagoras theorem, this is not my example, and this is Richard Taylor's example. That Richard Taylor is a Nobel Prize winner, and it's a very powerful demonstration. You can discover that the height by which the 2 rail tracks jump up is 450 centimeters. 450 centimeters ante 4.5 meters. Now think about this. What does your intuition do? What does your rational method do? What does your systems 1 do? What does your systems 2 do? The gap between the decision that you have arrived at is significant. In other words, your systems 1 can systematically take you away from truth because you are in such a great hurry to make a decision. So a mother, now let us see a simple application of this. A mother of a newborn child in an Indian household, poor household, can you imagine the amount of mental anxiety, cognitive load, time scarcity? You can have a variety of scarcities. One scarcity is your scarcity of money. You have scarcity of space in your house. You have scarcity of resources. But one of the biggest forms of scarcity that we don't often acknowledge is time scarcity. In a given day, మనకు 24 గంటలు. దాంట్లో ఆడవాళ్ళు ఏదైతే పని చేస్తారో that is far higher than the work that men do. And forgive me here. You know, there is a very powerful thinker. His name is Amartya Sen garu. అతను ఏమన్నారంటే, the amount of work that a woman does is much higher. The household work that a woman does goes unpaid for. It is a massive amount of work. A lot of inequality between men and women arises in our own households, and that's the tragedy. And so when they're doing all this work, they're trying to squeeze in their work. They have to cook food and get their kids out onto the bus. They have to make sure the lunch is ready. See, because we live in a gendered society, and then the kids come home, so you're flooded with activity. When you're flooded with your activity, what happens to your brain is that your brain is forced to making decisions only through a systems 1 approach. You don't have the leisure. Systems 2 requires a leisure, the luxury of time. Systems 1 is quick decision making. And that's what a lot of these people end up making. They end up making a lot of bad decisions, not because they're less intelligent, but because of the cognitive load on their brain. So for instance, I'll give you another example. You open your computer. Let us say you open a dozen tabs, doing multiple things, and the computer is working on all these tabs. The efficiency of doing any one activity comes down dramatically. Why? Because the processor now has to switch between multiple activities. I don't know if there's parallel tasking here, parallel processing, but nevertheless, even in parallel processing, you have to divide the resource of processing among multiple pieces of work which are being done simultaneously. So much so that the quantum of brain that you can dedicate to one activity then gets reduced dramatically. అయినప్పుడు the decisions that come out will have to depend on systems 1, and because they depend on systems 1, the quality of decisions also get reduced, and that's why they make a lot of poor decisions that can be bad for children. That's one sort of big picture idea that I thought I should present today. What I can also do is I can show you a couple of videos, Sandeep, which will introduce you to behavior science in a very nice, interesting manner. Let me present to you what is called as the marshmallow experiment. What it means is, ఇప్పుడు మనం we have to make trades in our life. By trades అంటే compromises. మనం ఎగ్జామ్లో పాస్ కావాలంటే ఇవాళ చదువుకోవాలి, and we have to postpone having fun for tomorrow. So the ability to postpone a pleasurable activity to a later time is a critical part of becoming successful. But oftentimes what we do is we are not able to control that human inability, and we end up consuming all the good things now, and that becomes a basis for an irrational distribution of resources across time, and we suffer later. So I want to show you a very iconic experiment. It's called the marshmallow experiment. Let me give you what I mean by that. I will describe, give you an overview of what they do. They take little children, and before each child, what they do is they put a little piece of sweat, a sweet. A marshmallow is basically a sweet. నువ్వు 10 నిమిషాలు or like 5 నిమిషాలు ఆ స్వీట్ తినకుండా వెయిట్ చేయగలిగితే నీకు రెండో స్వీట్ ఇస్తాం. అంటే యూ విల్ బి రివార్డెడ్ ఫర్ withholding your temptation to eat that sweet. That is the challenge అన్నమాట. You will see the struggle among the children now in this video of self-restraint. This is so a lot of fundamental human problems can be reduced to this idea of differing gratification. Those who are able to defer gratification to a later time are able to solve a lot of problems. Let us see how we can do this. Let me try and share it with you, Andy.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay.
So you get the picture, no? You get the picture of what is happening here. Now, fundamentally, we are no different. Every day we go through this phenomenon on a daily basis. All of us wanting to control weight, all of us trying to accomplish something in life, go through this struggle between immediate consumption and deferment of the consumption. A lot of human problems can be reduced to this. And those who are able to master this, there is a fundamental contradiction. There is almost a philosophical contradiction. A contradiction in ante, you want to do A, but you also want to do B, which is contradictory to A. So in other words, as a human being, you don't have consistency in what you want. And oftentimes, the fact that you want B overrides the fact that you want A. That is the deepest contradiction in our self-mother. So that is the critical thing in the matter. So now when you apply the systems 1, systems 2 framework, what it tells us is systems 1, immediate gratification. Systems 2 will say deferred gratification. But systems 2 is very, very hard. And that's where the deep challenge is. And that's why you need techniques, psychological techniques of how you can overcome the temptation of the present for the betterment of the future. And there are psychological techniques that we can have a longer discussion on that as we go forward in this discussion. But this is one perspective that I wanted to give you. The second perspective that I want to give you, Andy, relates to tunneling. It's a very famous experiment. And it shows you how your brain can end up making some mistakes. Let's see if we can get that here. Let me just.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion.
So this is a fascinating experiment which demonstrates how the human brain, when it is tasked with a certain activity, it underperforms another task that you need to undertake simultaneously. And this phenomena is called tunneling. And when human beings are afflicted by time scarcity or a variety of burdens, mental burdens, they're unable to, for instance, manage their financial resources well. Right? So time management becomes a critical part of human success. That's one sort of, and we can talk about how, there are any number of lessons. There's the McCarthy framework of time management. But the important thing here is, in a simple experiment like this, you can visualize that a lot of observers miss obvious things that are happening in the visual space, primarily because you're tasked with a certain set of factors. That's one. Another framework. I'm just giving you examples, flavor of what the human psychology can end up doing. Looks like, yeah. Let me show you another example, Andy. This example relates to the issue of justice. One of the things that rational choice economics, those of you who remember 1991, when we adopted the capitalist mode of production, at least when you were in business schools, everybody thought that being selfish is the most important thing, because somehow the selfishness of multiple individuals together in society would aggregate to a common welfare. This is the credo of a sort of a capitalist mode of production. But I want you to see how even animals feel when they're treated unequally. Equality is a fundamental principle, and it's a principle that animates not merely human beings, but how an unequal treatment or an unjust treatment of animals can produce a reaction. So this is an experiment. I want you to look at it. And the way the experiment is constructed is in the following manner. So there are two monkeys. The monkeys have to perform a task. What is the task? Rai wale. Rai is the experimenter or the scientist, he gives the monkey a cucumber, kira antanga, chopped cucumber, which is not very interesting. It's not very exciting. It's nutrition, but it's very low nutrition, or it's not such an exciting piece of food. But what he does in this experiment is he creates an inequality. First, he gives both the monkeys cucumber in exchange for the stone giving. But then he creates an inequality. He gives one of the monkeys a grape. A grape is sweeter, it's nicer than cucumber. And then you'll see the reaction of the other monkey. We'll just see that video here.
Experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with Capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees. But with Sarah Brosnan, we started out with Capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two Capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my Capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
So it's a fun experiment. It shows how the sense of justice is not merely a human trait. It's also present in the monkeys. Now, somebody might say the sense of justice is actually perhaps much more among monkeys than among humans sometimes. I mean, given the horrors that we see in our society. I mean, when I see little children being discarded on the street, I wonder, sometimes I wonder often about our own humanity, about sense of justice and so on. Now, purely from a rational choice point of view, justice is important. I mean, take for instance the fact that a woman has a brain just as good as a man's, and yet we don't allow her to work as much as a man. It is not merely an injustice from a moral point of view, but it is also irrational because the productivity of the world would be so much higher if women were also allowed to function equally. I mean, we can go into the sort of the social normative aspects of it. That's a different thing. But purely, whether you look at it from a systems 2 perspective or from a systems 1 perspective, it does not make sense. So there are a variety of social norms in society which do not make sense, which do not match up the requirements of justice. And justice is not just a moral thing. Justice is important from a purely rational point of view as well, Andy. Why? Because in a just society, people are happier. And if people are happier and more prosperous, it makes rational sense for us to incorporate justice, dharma. Dharma, it's not just a moral value, but it's a practical wisdom. And that's a sort of another point that I thought I should bring forward for today's discussion. But let me now stop here, and then maybe we can have a discussion. Kiran Garu, is that okay?
Yeah, perfectly fine. I was about to point out to you that we're reaching about an hour of the discussion.
Yeah.
So good time. We can pause here, and then Professor Ganadagach. If you raise your hand, we'll go according to the order. Raise hands.
Also, Kiran Garu, you should jump in and then let it be a free-flowing discussion rather than a one-way thing. Yeah.
Certainly. We have already hands raised, so we'll go there, and then if there's a gap, I will jump in and contribute. Nagaraj Garu, go ahead. మీరు మ్యూట్లో ఉన్నారు సార్. సరే, శ్యామ్ గారు మీరు అడగండి.
Thank you, Andy, Professor Garu. Thanks for the very enlightening session. Couple of questions actually, and they both are based on 2 topics that you kind of brought up. One is of course 1 versus 2, right? In the systems 1, I feel and based on what you have kind of explained, what I've seen, don't you think it's intuition అనేది మన past experiences మీద లేకపోతే మన past life మీద, they're all kind of defined and kind of what I'm searching for the right word. Intuition అనేది it's shaped by your past experiences or something that you're probably carrying through the generations, right? Whereas intuition systems 2 అనేది it's how do నాకు మీరు అన్నారు ఇంట్యూషన్ ఇది దాని డీప్ థింకింగ్ అన్నారు, కానీ I thought that even the intuition side of it is also kind of deep thinking, kind of transformed into intuition into a person. That was, is that a correct assumption to go with?
No, very good point. We will discuss this. This is a great.
Okay,
I'm
that's
glad
number
that
one.
you brought this up. Yeah.
Yeah. Number two, వచ్చేసి మీరు the marshmallow experiment చేస్తున్నప్పుడు, లెట్స్ టేక్ తెలుగు సామెతలు తీసుకుందాం. ఒక పక్కన నిదానమే ప్రధానం అంటాము, ఒక పక్కన ఆలస్యత అమృతం విషయం అంటాము. Where do you strike the balance? Because there is always a cost benefit analysis, right? How much time I can wait? అంటే ఎక్కడ ఒక స్టేజ్ తర్వాత ఈ అమృతం కాస్త విషయం కావడం మొదలు పెడుతుంది, and I'm probably going to lose out on the opportunity, right? Even if I want to kind of wait. And మీరు mathematics గురించి మాట్లాడినప్పుడు I was kind of thinking about it. There has to be some kind of an ROI for my patience.
Very nice.
But it's extremely difficult to kind of find that point of ROI. అంటే ఎక్కడ వెయిట్ చేస్తే నాకు వస్తున్నారో, ఎక్కడి నుంచి డిమినిష్ కావడం మొదలు పెడుతున్నది డిఫికల్ట్, చాలా చెప్పడం కష్టం అని చెప్పేసి, ఎస్పెషల్లీ బిహేవియర్ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూ నుంచి. And these two were kind of, bugging me when you were kind of talking about that. I don't know if these are questions or you know.
No. Brilliant insights, Andy. Absolutely brilliant insights. The first one, and thank you for bringing them up. So in the first distinction that chesano between intuition and systems 2, intuition being systems 1. Intuition is not any less important than systems 2. Intuition is a very powerful thing. The reason why we have survived as a human species is because of intuition. The instinct. So you got to understand, while we can end up making several mistakes using systems 1, you can't live without systems 1 either. Systems 1 is very important on account of the following reasons. In the evolutionary scheme of things, if you did not have systems 1, if you could not make those very instantaneous decisions, our species would have died. So there is a optimal usage of systems 1. And there is also the much needed requirement of systems 2, because without systems 2, you wouldn't have had your rockets, you wouldn't have had your computers, you wouldn't have had biological sciences. Now, how do you optimize these two? Which of these two do you use in which situation, Anirdi? That is the deepest behavioral challenge. And I'm not quite sure we have the answer to that question. When I described the distinction between systems 1 and systems 2 and the mistakes that we can make up from systems 1, I was not belittling systems 1. Systems 1 is the reason we are alive. It is one of the most foundational pieces of our cognitive apparatus which allow us to survive.
So we are saying that they both are equally important. Definitely, we are not discarding one over the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, for instance, if I don't follow my systems 1, the danger of being bitten by a snake, even though from a systems 2 point of view is overestimated, but on an evolutionary scale, by probability, an entire subsection of the species can be eliminated. Because even if the minute probability of it being a snake exists, there is a subsection of the population that selects into that behavior and it get eliminated. So from the point of view of evolutionary fitness, systems 1 becomes very critical. Systems 2 might be more important in a sort of a shorter time frame. We don't know. This is a hotly debated subject. Your second question is equally important, Andy. Present consumption is also very important. If we don't have consumption at the present moment, and what we should be doing at a certain age, if we are not doing that, and if we postpone everything else up into the front, then we might be losers as well. The reason is, as John Maynard Keynes, the famous Cambridge economist, said, in the long run, we may just all be dead. Now, the question is, if you were to now draw a mathematical function of consumption now weighed against consumption in the future, And then it becomes an optimization exercise as to how you smoothen your consumption over multiple periods of time and how you optimize that. And we can't do that naturally. But one thing is for sure, if I have 2 kids, they need to postpone their pleasure to study sometimes. If they didn't do that, then it certainly is a case where they will lose out in a very big. So when you need to be when you need to be investing in something really, really foundationally important, then you got to defer gratification. But you can't be such a machine. See, I'm on a diet. In a weekend in Hyderabad వచ్చానండి. I'm on a diet. I'm trying to control my weight. కానీ వేడి అన్నము నెయ్యి మామిడికాయ తొక్కు చూస్తే తినకపోతే వాట్ ఈస్ ద మీనింగ్ ఆఫ్ లైఫ్ అనేది కూడా వస్తుంది సార్ క్వశ్చన్.
సార్ మీరు అమెరికాలో ఉన్న వాళ్ళకి రాత్రిపూట చెప్తే కష్టం.
ఏం సార్?
అమెరికాలో ఉన్న వాళ్ళకి రాత్రిపూట చెప్తే కష్టం.
మీరు అమెరికాలో ఉన్నారా ఇప్పుడు?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
But it's a point very well taken. It's a great point. I completely agree. So we have to be human, and while we are human, while we are being human, we also need to, in some sense, optimize. We need to enhance our happiness, maximize it to our capacities. So and that's why behavior science becomes critical in that effort.
Got it. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks. Great questions, Andy. Thanks for bringing this.
యామవ్వర్ గారు అడిగిన రెండో ప్రశ్న చాలా మంచి ప్రశ్న, ఎందుకంటే నాలాంటి వాళ్ళకి ఉపయోగపడుతుంది. ఏదో అలమారా సర్దుదాం అనుకుంటాను, అందులో పాత పేపర్ కనిపిస్తుంది, ఏదో కథ ఉంటుంది అందులో, అలమారా పక్కన పడేసి ఆ కథ చదువుకుంటూ కూర్చుంటాను. అప్పుడు ఓకే ఇలా చేయకూడదు అని మళ్ళీ బ్యాక్ టు వెళ్తాను. సో మీరు అన్నట్టు బ్యాలెన్స్ ఈజ్ ఇంపార్టెంట్. అది మాత్రం చాలా బాగా చెప్పారు. సరే, మళ్ళీ నాగరాజు గారిని ఒకసారి సార్ మాట్లాడతారా అండి? సార్ ఆయన రెస్పాండ్ అవ్వట్లేదు. నెక్స్ట్ అలోక్ గారు. సార్ చెప్పండి సార్.
ఐ థింక్ నేను కూడా ఇంతకుముందు అతను అడిగినట్టే అడగాలనుకున్నాను. బేసికలీ లైఫ్ లో ఏమవుతుందంటే అట్ డిఫరెంట్ పాయింట్స్, లైక్ పవన్ గారు కరెక్ట్ గా చెప్పినట్టు, విద్యార్థి దశలో, లేకపోతే కొత్తగా ఉద్యోగం చేరినప్పుడు, లేకపోతే కొత్తగా పెళ్ళైన తర్వాత మధ్య వయస్కుల్లోనో లేదా చివరిలోనో, ఐ థింక్ వీ హ్యావ్ టు లుక్ ఎట్ లైఫ్ ఇన్ మల్టిపుల్ ఫేజెస్ అండ్ డిసైడ్ వాట్ ఈస్ ద most right things to do, what is the affordable things to do at that age, and try not to postpone. For example, my age is 64 now. I sometimes regret that I should have gone for some treks. I should have gone for Manasarovar, but somewhere in the middle of my career I was pushing so much the pedal on my career. I didn't realize that certain things in life are to be done. And the second thing is this delayed gratification అనేది ఒక్కోసారి ఏమవుతుందంటే పేరెంట్స్ వల్ల కూడా, ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ మై ఫాదర్ ఇస్ అ సెంట్రల్ గవర్నమెంట్ ఎంప్లాయీ, చాలా సింపుల్ గా ఉండేవారు. ఈజ్ అన్ ఎపిటోమ్ ఆఫ్ వర్చ్యూ ఇన్ టర్మ్స్ ఆఫ్ లీడింగ్ ఎ వెరీ సింపుల్ లైఫ్. But then what happens is, because of that, I also got some of his because he led the life and then he was an example. Now I realized that middle of my life, I think I delayed the gratification so much. Right. So it's as you rightly said, I think what is important at each age, I think that perspective people have to get. Just a comment. Second thing is I had,
చెప్పండి సార్.
రెండో పాయింట్ ఏంటంటే that experiment about the monkeys, right? The moment you see the other monkeys getting a better thing, and you become a little worried. I think this is another fundamental behavioral issue I've noticed all my life, and even with others, and more so with myself also. Just to give an example, long time back when I was working in the Gulf, I became tremendously dissatisfied when I was allotted a 2-bedroom house compared to the same level guy who got a 3-bedroom house. Actually, it didn't matter. He was also husband and wife. I was also husband and wife, two of us. But just because he got a grape instead of a marshmallow, whatever that cucumber, I felt pain for so long. But obviously, after some time, now looking back, I mean, with a longer perspective, I don't know what you were trying to convey. I wanted to know more on that comparison. What exactly you wanted to say? I mean, you should not compare with others. But innately we compare.
Yeah.
Justice, point of justice. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, two great questions again, Andy. So the first point relating to how do we smoothen consumption across different phases of life. One analytical technique of doing that is not to think of ourselves not as an individual, but as a multiple set of individuals. My name is Pawan Mahamadi. That name is persisting since my childhood. But am I really one person? In 1980, I was one person. In 1981, I was another person. So literally, you can see hundreds and thousands of Pawan Mahamadis at different stages. So in other words, Pawan Mahamadi that I think is an individual is really a society of multiple individuals. So to think about an individual not as an individual, but to shift it to a different frame of thinking, which is to think of it as a society, I think is a very important thing to do. Why is it important to do? Now the problem can be restated in the following manner. If you were to construct an individual as thousands of individuals, now you're thinking about how do I increase the happiness for that entire society? So you're reformulating the optimization exercise of increasing the happiness of optimizing the happiness of an individual to increasing the happiness of multiple people. And now, do we use a principle of democracy in reconciling the interests of these multiple people, or do we use some other voting rule? What is the decision rule that we use in optimizing the happiness of these multiple people across different times? So it's a philosophical shift that you need to undertake.
Yeah. Yes.
That's a very, it's easier said than done, but at least we need to conceptualize it, and that is very important. Because when I'm 85, I'm a different person, and my priorities are very, very different. In point of fact, there was this wonderful experiment that was run, Andy, where they talked to a lot of people who are old, who are nearing the end of their life. What do you think? And then they discovered a systematic difference between those who are really happy from those who are not very happy. And they found that those who are happy had made a special effort to keep in touch with all their friends and their past.
Okay.
In other words, staying in touch was the most precious resource for them, and it was not money at all. So priorities were completely different. Now, that's one priority. When I'm 25, I have another priority. Now, how do I reconcile those two priorities? How do I balance giving a finite resource between these two individuals? Is the deep question. And that is a question that we have to, it's very difficult to answer that. But you at least need some thinking. You need to think of yourself not just now, but at multiple stages of your life. Put them down on a common table and see how you can. It's almost like you have multiple monkeys on the table now, and you can't give grape to one monkey and cucumber to one, and then that creates an imbalance. Yeah, so think along those lines. So it's a very interesting direction to think about. The monkey experiment itself, and it shows a fundamental human trait or animal trait, and that is to be treated unequally is deeply disturbing, not merely for humans, but also for simians and for animals. So in some sense, the principles of justice are not just human. The principles of justice, dharma, is an integral part of nature. That's very important. And this is something that economists have failed to understand in the way they constructed the neoclassical system of economics, where they thought that an individual is a very selfish entity maximizing happiness only for himself or herself. It is wrong. Human beings are not like that. Human beings undertake sacrifice. If there's a child who is drowning in the river, human beings jump into the river to put their own lives at risk to save that child. Right? So, I mean, the ability to abnegate your own happiness, the ability to undertake sacrifice, and human history is a story of great sacrifices. Right? And those stories tell us that human beings are not selfish. Human beings are also selfless, and that selflessness makes us human beings. And that's something that behavior science, and then that's what psychology came into the world of economics to tell economists. Economists were foolish to think that human beings are purely selfish. And it took psychologists to remind them of a very simple truth that even my grandmother, my non-literate grandmother in Mahbubnagar village would have known. The selfishness ain't really. It's rubbish. Right? So I brought that experiment just to exemplify that point. That's all.
Okay. I actually wanted to add something more, but I would stop now because there are other people raising. Maybe I'll write to you separately.
Sure,
I have some queries.
Sure, sir.
Thank you.
Sure, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great questions, sir. Thank you.
సార్ పవన్ గారు మీరు చెప్పిన దాని ప్రకారం అయితే ఇప్పుడు అలా ఒక్కొక్క సంవత్సరాన్ని ఒక్కొక్క మనిషిగా ఒక్కొక్క ఇండివిజువల్ గా తీసుకోవాలనుకుంటే మన టీమ్స్ అన్నిటిని ఇన్ఈక్వల్ గా చేసేది మన పేరెంట్స్. తర్వాత మనల్ని మనమే చేసేసుకుంటాం. 20 దగ్గర నుంచి ఒక 40 దాకా మనల్ని మనమే ఇన్ఈక్వల్ గా ట్రీట్ చేస్తామేమో అనిపిస్తుంది.
అది పాలసీలో అప్లికేషన్ ఇస్తానమ్మా. It's a very important policy. It applies to how we think about policy. Take, for instance, the cultural resistance to think about what happens to your property after you pass away. Oftentimes, we are reluctant to write our wills. Do you know what is the biggest behavioral barrier to writing our wills? In our society in particular, we don't write our wills. Many families, they have a lot of property, they don't write. Even the Ambani didn't write a proper will. Now, why don't they write their wills? Because the mere thought about thinking of a time when they are not there produces a lot of unhappiness now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's an unhappy thought to think about. నేను లేనప్పుడు నా పిల్లలకి ఏమవుతుంది అనేది అవాయిడెన్స్ ఏం చేస్తామంటే మనం దాని గురించే ఆలోచన చేయాలి. ఆలోచన చేయకుండా మనం దాన్ని రాయకపోతే ఏమవుతుందంటే దాంతో do you know the number of conflicts that exist in the high courts and civil courts and our Indian judicial system because of that? Literally, there are millions of cases of disputes on account of just that reluctance. If we can, for instance, so now how does it relate to our original discussion? Our inability to think of our ultimate part of ourselves.
Beyond our being. Yeah.
Our being. You have basically on account of yourself, because of your current selfishness is the avoidance of thinking of the future self. What you have basically done is you have transferred a very big problem to your children, which you don't want to. You don't think about that. Right? So there are very concrete policy applications. Discomfort avoidance. Exactly, sir. Somebody, Jagan Garu, absolutely. It's the same. It's a behavioral barrier. There's another very interesting behavioral barrier, interesting equivalent behavioral barrier, and it's called rational ignorance. మనం అనుకుంటాం ఏంటంటే information is a good thing in life. And we are information seeking under all conditions. Because why information is money, and therefore it's useful. It helps contracts, it helps policy, it helps discipline making. But sometimes we willfully avoid information, and that phenomenon is called rational ignorance. Rational ignorance is a form of behavior which you exhibit in order to avoid information which brings you a lowering of happiness. So, for instance, a lot of people have avoided HIV testing. Why? Because the uncertainty of whether I have HIV or not produces unhappiness. So, what they do is they completely avoid it, even if the consequences of avoiding the testing are far worse than actually getting tested and causing yourself a little bit of unhappiness, temporary unhappiness.
Yeah, annual health checkups postponed.
Absolutely. These are all examples. Yeah, maybe we can
Thank
take.
you very much, sir. Yeah, sure. Alok garu మాట్లాడతారండి.
రమేష్ రెడ్డి గారు ముందర రేస్ చేశారు.
చెప్పండి సార్.
రమేష్ రెడ్డి గారు.
Hi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Pawan garu. Thanks a lot for that nice session. I'll first, my first thing is probably more of a statement, and then I'll ask my question. My day job is actually to manage pay or compensation for an IT company, so I get thrown cucumbers on a daily basis. The challenge there is more to see the concept of equity itself is so complex, right? Even when I think that I am making equitable pay decisions to employees, the employees assume that there is inequity. I mean, even in the example of the monkey, that yes, probably the monkey that got the grape, let's say it delivered you a better stone than the monkey which got a cucumber, right? I don't think the other monkey will see that or want to recognize that, even if it recognizes it, right? So that's that kind of avoidance in actually even defining equity is something that I see on a daily basis. Yeah, so I have a lot of cucumbers that I get every day. Okay, so I'll move to the question part. And this is not about the science part. I'm just that curious about how does one go from studying philosophy to law to how does one get to behavioral science from that? Like, it's just maths to philosophy to law and then behavioral science. It's very diverse.
Yeah.
That's one question. The other question that I had was, I mean, one of the let's say the takeaways that I wanted to have from the session is, I mean, I know behavioral science is vast, right? But on a daily basis, we make a lot of decisions. Can you give us some common mistakes or common frameworks that I can use, right, that will help in making better decisions?
No, great thoughts, Sandeep. So with regard to the first part of your question, which relates to the monkey piece and the equity piece, one of the very subtle things that people who watch this video miss out is the fact that so the video captures one very important principle of behavior science, which is inequity aversion on top. Daniel Kahneman calls it inequity aversion. But there is an equally subtle and a beautiful point from the point of view of philosophy of science that needs to be noticed in that video. When the second monkey is given a grape and the first monkey is given a cucumber, I don't know if you noticed, but the monkey tests the rock. It tests the rock. In other words, there is an urge to establish what in philosophy of science is called ceteris paribus. You may have encountered this expression, ceteris paribus ante all things being equal. So the monkey is trying to establish that. So in other words, the demand for ceteris paribus, the demand for an equality of states as a precondition for an equality of outcomes is a fascinating thing. When we run an experiment, let us say, let me try to explain the concept of ceteris paribus. I take a sample of people. Let's say I'm trying to experiment on pharmaceuticals. I take all the people who have a headache, 500 people. Randomly divide them into two groups, 250 and 250. Measure their levels of headache. I'm talking about a randomized control trial here, right? Statistically, I find that both levels of headache are equal in these two groups. One group, I give them a glass of water. Another group, I give them a glass of water and an aspirin. And now do an inline measure. Inline measure, I noticed that in the aspirin group, the headache has come down. And from that, I established that aspirin actually causes a lowering of headache. But here, the critical element of this construction of this social event is the fact that I have randomized my sample of people with headaches into two groups. And the reason why I have randomized is because randomization is the process by which you hope to establish ex ante that the two groups are almost identical to each other. So establishing the commonality of conditions in both situations is critical for me to be able to draw a causal inference. So one is the counterfactual of the other. So the demand for the measurement of equality between the two conditions is the demand for ceteris paribus, and that is at the foundation of what we mean by experiments. An experiment is not an experiment if you have unequal things. Now, if there are unequal situations and one gets a higher amount and the other gets a lower amount, you can understand, you can pass it off to the difference. If two people get taxed differently, that's because they may be in different tax brackets. So the application of law is different based on what you've done. Similarly, if two people are doing different kinds of work and you pay differently, then it becomes all right.
You need to communicate clearly. Yeah.
So the second part of your question, Andy, how did I move from maths to, if you are talking about me, back in the day, I studied mathematics, sir, and I loved mathematics. I enjoy it even now. But back in the day, they said that, if you're a mathematician, just to school so they scared me with the idea that I will not make much money and so on. And at that stage in my life, I wanted to be comfortable, so I decided to take up law. But I was a terrible lawyer, and I was not a good lawyer. And when you're not good at practice in some field, you become a professor in that field. So I became a law professor, as one does. So that's the paradox of life. So I was a terrible lawyer, and therefore I became a law professor. And then I got bored of it, sir. I was a professor at IIM Bangalore for several years. I got sick and tired of that because there was no research, there was no discovery. It's just teaching the same thing. So I said, let me go, and so then I went away back to America. I went to MIT, and then I spent some time there, and then I took up a PhD in social psychology and then acquired research methods and so on. And then I redefined my life, sir, to become a proper behavioral scientist. And I really love the stuff that I enjoy that. So that's my trajectory. Let me pause there and take more thoughts and questions.
Very inspiring.
I don't know if it's inspiring. My mother used to think that I was a fool because she thought that the engineering lekkal chaduvtunnadu దాంట్లో లెక్కల తర్వాత వీడు టీచర్ ఉద్యోగం చేస్తా ఉంటున్నాడు అమెరికా నుంచి రిటర్న్ వచ్చేసి so I was a big disappointment for my mother. So but that's the cost that you have to pay for following your soul and your heart.
So I want to, because a lot of people have raised hands, so I want to quickly through them. So I request everyone to just limit to one question so that we can maximize the time available. Alok Nanda garu, మీరు అడగండి.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Pawan garu, first of all, thank you, sir, for the simple and profound concepts. Understanding these concepts that can make life better and hence make society better. But as you said, experts like you being associated with organizations like NITI, which impact everyone's lives, like in subtle and maybe obvious ways in policies also. But pardon my indulgence of a more generic and, dare I say, blatant question. I think any science is as good as the good it does for the society, right? And if it becomes too complicated for a layman like me to understand and apply it to my own life, or maybe it is put on a pedestal as a niche branch of life science by maybe various parameters and factors, how can an average person benefit from that science? I mean, indaka ante this is more like what Ramesh Reddy garu adigin question lagane undi, but I wanted to ask you, like, are there any workshops or courses that people can attend, or any literature that is available for those who seek really? Because I have been extremely intrigued by behavior science before I even knew there was a science like this. But I did not study anything, or I did not attend any courses. But thanks to two movies that actually opened my eyes about human behavior, I got more and more involved with this. But my question is, how can a simple person gain more knowledge about such profound topics?
Yeah. So thanks for raising that question, Andy. So first of all, this is not rocket science. I think a lot of insights of behavior science have already existed. I mean, we knew them intuitively, but somebody needed to systematically sort of package them and evaluate them and test them and so on. Our movement ayindi. Rendodi endante this thing about me being a simple person, and therefore can I incorporate the findings of this science? So I went to school and I noticed several students who had greater willpower than I did. And I used to think maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with me. I wish somebody had helped me at that stage, that this other person who I thought had greater willpower really was using a certain set of steps which I could have adopted to have that same kind of a resilience. So it's not because some are born superior to others that some people have that ability to defer gratification. Some of these techniques can be taught and democratized very easily. They can be made accessible. For instance, this whole business of willpower, that willpower anagane mana enukunta ante, oh, it's some magical thing in the head of the person, and this person has an abundance of that quality, and therefore they have it and I don't have it, and I give into temptation much more easily than the other person, therefore I will never succeed. But there is nothing like willpower. Willpower is really a finite set of strategies that an individual can adopt, and these are called commitment devices. These are very concrete things that you can actually do, which will help you tie you to a course of action. And when you start engaging in that behavior, it will appear that you also have that same willpower. So willpower is this metaphysical construct that we have. It's not something that we're born with. It's just simple techniques. Our techniques ఏంటి అంటే అవి నేర్చుకోవాలి. So you can actually democratize some of these qualities across the world. Time management, for instance. Some people are able to sort of organize themselves brilliantly. But there's a very simple framework, and I can send it across to you. Take a look at it. You'll be able to manage your time. The only difference between people who you think are special, who are born special, and yourself really is a matter of exposure to some of these techniques. Nothing else. We are all equal fundamentally. That's something that you need to recognize. The second point that I would like to humbly suggest to you, sir, there's a vast amount of literature there. I mean, of course, there's a lot of noise also, and this has become such a pop subject. Everybody has become a behavior scientist now. But there is some literature which I think you should read, and it will give you a lot of confidence. And it's a science. It's not a feel-good, help yourself kind of a thing. This is based on hard empirical. People have won Nobel Prize, Nobel Awards based on this. It's a science. And because it is a science, there is also something else that you need to acknowledge. Science is humble enough to fail. It only can give you probabilities of success. Science, the endeavor of science is always one of humility. To say, if I have failed, I have failed, and my hypothesis, it hasn't stood up to the test of time. Right? And therefore, I think science is far, far more trustworthy because it has that human. But what has happened in recent times is science has become very arrogant. It makes claims beyond what it should. The core value of science should be humility, and then behavior science also should be attended by that humility. To say maybe there is a small set of cases where it doesn't work. You got to accept that. If you are willing to accept that, then I think then it becomes far less distressing for you to adopt it as a personal sort of credo. Let me pause there, sir.
Sir, please, after this meeting, ఈ మీటింగ్ అయిన తర్వాత ఆ రిసోర్సెస్ నాకు పంపిస్తే నేను ఇప్పుడు అంతా షేర్ చేసుకుంటాను. తర్వాత పవన్ సంతోష్ గారు మీరు ప్రశ్న అడిగారు
సార్. నమస్తే అండి. మీరు చెప్పిన చాలా విషయాలు చాలా ఇంట్రెస్టింగ్ అనిపించాయి. ముఖ్యంగా ఈ హ్యూమన్స్ ఆర్ నాట్ రేషనల్ అనేది చాలా నా వరల్డ్ వ్యూ ఏంటంటే, ఇఫ్ నాట్ హ్యూమన్స్, లైక్ అట్లీస్ట్ సక్సెస్ఫుల్ పీపుల్ ఆర్ లైక్ రేషనల్ బికాస్ దే ఆర్ సక్సెస్ఫుల్ బికాస్ దే ఆర్ రేషనల్. ఇలాంటి ఒక మైండ్ సెట్ తో నేను ఉండేవాడిని అనమాట. లైక్ ఆల్ ద పీపుల్ హూ ఆర్ లైక్ లీడింగ్ ఏ కంట్రీ, దే ఆర్ రేషనల్. ఆల్ ద పీపుల్ హూ ఆర్ బిల్డింగ్ ఏ ఒక వ్యాపార సామ్రాజ్యాన్ని సృష్టించే వాళ్ళందరూ రేషనల్ అని నేను అనుకునేవాడిని. బట్ లాస్ట్ 1.5 year నుంచి జరుగుతున్న ఇన్సిడెంట్స్ చూస్తే ఆ ఊహ అనేది అంత కరెక్ట్ కాదేమో అని చెప్పి నాకు మెల్లిగా తోస్తూ వచ్చింది. ఈవేళ మీరు చెప్పినవి విన్న తర్వాత చాలా క్లారిటీ తోచింది. దట్ గోస్ ఇన్ టు పాలిటిక్స్. సో నేను ఆ పార్ట్ వదిలేస్తాను. నాకు పర్సనల్ క్వశ్చన్ ఏంటంటే, ఐ వర్క్ ఇన్ ఏ కమ్యూనిటీ మేనేజ్మెంట్ ఇండస్ట్రీ. నేను చేయవలసిన పని ఎలాంటిదంటే, మామూలుగా ప్లాట్ఫామ్స్ లైక్ కోరా, వికీపీడియా ఇలాంటి చోట్ల జనాన్ని వాళ్ళ న్యాచురల్ ఇంట్యూషన్ కి వ్యతిరేకంగా అనుకోవచ్చేమో బహుశా. ఎందుకంటే ఎన్నాళ్ళు అనుకునేది ఏంటి, జనం వర్క్ చేసేది డబ్బు కోసమో ఇంకొక సెల్ఫిష్ మోటివ్ కోసమో పనిచేస్తారు అని చెప్పి మన ఊహ. బట్ నేను చేయవలసిన ఉద్యోగం ఏంటంటే, అంత డబ్బు ఏం ప్రొవైడ్ చేయము. అట్లా అని చెప్పి ఇప్పుడు వికీపీడియాలో రాసే వాళ్ళకైతే గ్రాటిఫికేషన్ కూడా చాలా తక్కువే ఉంటుంది. అంటే వాళ్ళకేం బయలుదేరి ఉండదు, ఇంకేం ఉండదు. వాళ్ళు రాయవలసింది ఊరికే ఏంటంటే, వాళ్ళకు ఒక ఆత్మసంతృప్తి కోసం రాయాలి. లేదంటే ఒక గుప్పెడు జనం ఉంటారు, అది అర్థం చేసుకోగలిగిన వాళ్ళు, ఒక 30-40 మంది కమ్యూనిటీ మెంబర్స్ ఉంటారు మహా అయితే. వాళ్ళలో వాళ్ళు అప్రిషియేట్ చేసుకుంటారు, వాళ్ళలో వాళ్ళు చిన్న బాన్ స్టార్స్ ఇచ్చుకుంటారు. ఇట్లాంటి ఒక గ్రూప్ ని దాని న్యాచురల్ కెపాసిటీకి మించి గ్రో చేయడం అనేది నేను ప్రయత్నించిన ఉద్యోగం. తర్వాత కోరా అనే దాంట్లో నేను చేసింది కూడా ఆల్మోస్ట్ అలాంటిదే. మనం ఏం ప్రొవైడ్ చెయ్యం, వాళ్ళు రాయాలి. ఓవరాల్ గా ఐడియా అదే. మళ్ళీ నేను కంటిన్యూ చేసేది కూడా ఇదే. ఇందులో బిహేవియర్ సైన్స్ నాకు చాలా ఉపయోగపడుతుంది అనిపిస్తుంది. బట్ ఏదైనా కొన్ని ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ ఉంటాయా? ఎందుకంటే వికీపీడియా లాంటి చోట అది ఈజీ థింగ్ టు లెర్న్ కూడా కాదు వికీపీడియా అనేది. దెర్ ఆర్ లాట్ ఆఫ్ ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ దట్ ఈస్ వర్కింగ్ బిహైండ్. అది వాళ్ళు శ్రద్ధగా నేర్చుకుని పనిచేయాలి. అండ్ ఫైనల్ గా వాళ్ళకి ఏం రాదు, ఆ విషయం వాళ్ళు అర్థం చేసుకోవాలి. వస్తే మహా అయితే ఏంటంటే ఒక 4 ఈవెంట్స్ కి ఇన్విటేషన్ వస్తుంది, నలుగురు మెచ్చుకుంటారు, అంతకుమించి ఏం జరగదు. సో ఇప్పుడు నేను గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాల్సిన విషయాలు ఏంటి, అండ్ ఐఎమ్ బీయింగ్ వెరీ ఆనెస్ట్, కొన్ని సక్సెస్ఫుల్ అవుతున్నాయి తీసుకున్న ఇనిషియేటివ్స్, కొన్ని సక్సెస్ఫుల్ అవ్వట్లేదు. అట్లానే స్కేల్ చేయడం, రిప్లికేట్ చేయడం కూడా అంత ఈజీగా ఏం లేదు. టు బీ ఫ్రాంక్, చాలా మంది తడివిట్లాడుతున్న విషయమే తప్ప సక్సెస్ఫుల్ ఏం కాదు, 100% సక్సెస్ఫుల్ కాదు. ఇలాంటి సందర్భంలో ఎలాంటి ప్రిన్సిపల్స్, అట్లీస్ట్ కొన్ని ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ అయినా ఎలాంటివి గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాలి హ్యూమన్ బిహేవియర్ గురించి?
సో మీరు you have identified a very important principle about why human beings create and are engage in the activity of creativity and engage in the activity of contributing to public good. Wikipedia, the examples that you took. So there is a deep puzzle again in the world of economics. There's a phenomenon called free riding. Free riding ante indi, సొసైటీలో అందరు చేస్తారు, నేను చేస్తా, I don't need to do it, I can free ride on the work of other people. And it's a phenomenon. Now everybody then becomes a free rider, and when everybody becomes a free rider, nobody contributes to the public good. And now the question is, the deep puzzle ఎక్కడ వచ్చిందంటే ఓపెన్ సోర్స్ మూవ్మెంట్ లో, ఫర్ ఇన్స్టెన్స్ ఓపెన్ సోర్స్ ఫెనామినా ఉందండి. Why are these people contributing to this public good without free riding అనే క్వశ్చన్ వచ్చింది. And then there have been discussions about why are people being creative, why are scientists being creative? Are they doing it for patents, are they doing it for money, or are they doing it for an intrinsic motivation అనే క్వశ్చన్ కూడా వచ్చింది. Social scientists have discovered empirically that a lot of people engage in the activity of a creative activity for either of two reasons, sir. One is inherent motivation. అంటే ఏంటంటే, నేను ఏదో ఒక చిన్నప్పుడు చెత్త డబ్బాలతో మనం ఏదో కన్స్ట్రక్ట్ చేసుకుంటాం, creative, it doesn't mean anything, but thing is the pleasure that you got from building that little thing out of complete trash was supreme, and that is a great motivation for producing something new. A lot of innovation in society is, you think Wright brothers were thinking that I'm going to be building an airline industry? No, the intrinsic motivation to just help develop that heavier than air object that can fly fueled that imagination. So the contribution to your Wikipedias and all that is downstream. So the first motivation is intrinsic motivation. Another example that comes to my mind is Capuchin. Capuchin is was a biochemist, and he was obsessed with trying to understand the structure of the benzene molecule. And given the valencies, etc., కుదరలేదు. వాడు రోజు రాత్రి పడుకున్న తర్వాత వాడికి నిద్రలో కల వచ్చింది, ఏంటంటే of a snake biting its own tail. ఆ విజువలైజేషన్ తోటి ఏం చేశాడంటే వాడు, he arrived at the idea that the benzene molecule is actually a circular structure. So the motivation, the fuel for that creative urge was not money, was not somebody recognizing him, nothing. వాడు పొద్దుగా లేస్తే ఓహో తాళి కొడతాడని చేయలేదు, వాడికి అది దాంట్లో ఉన్న ఆనందం అది దాంతో చేశాడు. చాలా గొప్ప విషయం. Intrinsic motivation is a great phenomenon, and how you can harness that in your line of work then becomes something that you need to think about very systematically. The second very powerful motivation is the motivation of being recognized by your peers. We need peer group notoriety అంటాం. మీరు ఓషన్స్ 11 సినిమా చూసారా? వాళ్ళందరూ కలిసి దొంగతనాలు చేస్తారు. ఆ దొంగతనం ఎందుకు చేస్తారు? అది ఆ దొంగతనం అనేది ఒక క్రియేటివ్ ఆస్పెక్ట్ గా చూస్తారు. And they want to acquire that notoriety that they are creative people. There's a wonderful paper written by Josh Lerner and Jean Tirole. Kiran garu pampista. They wrote a paper on why people contribute to the open source phenomena. The reason why a lot of people contribute to open source phenomena is because of this peer group notoriety. Abba, nenu enta cool manushin ra, nenu idi chesanu nenu. Reputational advantage naaku vaste, I'm not thinking of money there. I'm thinking of recognition in my immediate peer group. That's another very powerful driving force. And third, of course, is the lure of the lucre. And by that I mean I'm driven by the need to make money. But that's a very weak incentive, Andy. Money is a very useless incentive compared to intrinsic and peer group notoriety in producing creativity. So for all the fora that you are trying to create, you should focus on intrinsic motivation, and you should also look at how non-pecuniary awards, There's this wonderful social scientist, her name is Jana Gallo. She works on non-pecuniary awards. Non-pecuniary awards ante double ivadam kaadu, recognition. How can you leverage recognition to get people to do really well anedi adi kuda meeru think about it, systematically study it in your organization. So there are double tote avutundi anedi I don't believe in that. There's a great example of how money actually can be damaging. There is the example of a daycare center in Israel and baby care center. Every day parents were coming very late to that daycare center to pick up their kids, causing inconvenience to the daycare. Babysitters untaru kada paapam vallu kuda intiki povali, and every day parents were coming late. At em chesarante daycare center fellows, they basically imposed a fine. Per hour late avute meeku $5 lekka kattali. Can you imagine what the consequence of that was?
late ga vastund.
Even more late. See, at least when you had a non-pecuniary form of punishment on the individuals, there was a normative pressure that worked on those individuals, and at least they behaved in a certain way. Rather than increasing that, they went into, so sometimes getting money and getting the market into a place where you should only be using norms or you should be using psychology to get people to behave can actually cause a lot of damage. So market solutions are not the ultimate end-all solutions for problems in society. You need to think more holistically.
Low penalties for traffic violations in India is another thing.
Low penalties.
People who can afford, people can get away because they can afford.
What they did in Hyderabad, penalties did not matter all that very much. This drunk driving కొరకు CV ఆనందన్ ఉన్నాడు, పాత మిత్రుడు. ఏం చేశాడంటే, ఇది కమిషనర్ ఆఫ్ పోలీస్ ఏదో అయ్యాడు ఇప్పుడు. What he did was he involved a system where the violator had to get their family members to the court on matter for counseling sessions. Can you imagine if you're caught drunk driving and you have to take your mother the next day to a court? That is a far powerful, దానంత భయంకరమైన టెక్నిక్ ఇంకేం లేదండి.
మీ పేరెంట్స్ స్కూల్లో అంటారు కదా,
అమ్మో అది ఆ భయం. So sociologically, it's a brilliant, CV Anand is a brilliant guy for having done that. Right? Leveraging social forces to produce the change is a very important. Think about all those things. We can discuss.
What did you say?
So officially we've crossed the time limit, but we'll just take whatever time Pavan garu has. Next Jaganmanda garu meeru adigandi sir.
Actually, just wanted to make a couple of points, and actually, because you talked about self-control, my way of actually, I'm a dabbler in behavioral science myself, because being so-called behavioral trainer in a IT company for a while, not a PhD, and I call PhD as passion, hard work, and discipline. Actually, I don't have any of the three, but I only try to build them. So. One quick question, Andy, about self-control. Somebody was asking the same question. Actually, by way of getting my own brain working is to answer questions in Quora, and people ask these questions, and Telugulo rastu untan actually. There was a question on, and I'm actually trying to check with you whether the answer is correct. Okay, so about self-control, there was a basic question, and I was asking, and I was answering because I read up so many sources, but I try to write now. So all or nothing is the paradox. Sucker choices antar kada. Sometimes we think we fall like either we should be Gautam Buddha, which we are not, or am I the biggest Prabuddha? Probably I'm not that either. So many times, whatever Gayatri was telling about, నేను ఇవాళ మొత్తం క్లీన్ చేసేస్తాను, అదే మొత్తం చదివేస్తాను, she gets caught up with reading while trying to clean up that self. She ends up reading the whole whatever missed Sanchikali or whatever favorite book she has got it, then she feels guilty at the end of it. So most of the time we are either on this side trying to paint out as a very perfect picture, or try to all to the other extent. Where is అంటే మనం ఇది మన వాళ్ళు చెప్పింది కదా, మధ్యమ మధ్యమ మార్గం.
Middle
I
path.
think middle path is always educated, but we don't have, we don't need a investors to tell us that.
Yeah. No. Wonderful point, sir. Wonderful. You're absolutely right. దాన్ని మనము పర్ఫెక్షనిజం పెరాలిసిస్ కూడా అని అంటాం. ఏమంటే మనం అడుగు పెడితే అది పర్ఫెక్ట్ ఉండాలి, లేకపోతే చేయొద్దని. ఇట్ ఈస్ అ ప్రెషర్ దట్ వి కిల్ అవర్ సెల్స్ విత్. It is often a lot of people don't even start doing a project because they're paralyzed by perfection. అది కరెక్ట్ గా వచ్చే వరకు నేను చేయాలి. It becomes almost an excuse for inaction. Writer's block అని అంటారు కదా. People don't write because
I took nearly one year to write my self-help book. Actually, 3 years ago. Will skill chill clues for overcoming your transition blues అని ఒక మిడ్ కెరియర్ పీపుల్ కి సెల్ఫ్ రిఫ్లెక్టివ్ బుక్ లాగా రాసాను. యాక్చువల్లీ 3 years back. I was trying to address the transition problem. See, I'm basically my unconventional path helped me to basically I was not a good speaker at all. I could only articulate myself through writing. Actually, I'm not today. 15 years ago. So tongue-tied person, just another software guy, started way back in 91. But then just
amazing story indeed.
Just took some unconventional stuff. I don't want to take time actually.
No.
Because I have a verbal diarrhea now. And once I used to be tongue-tied, but now I have verbal diarrhea, so I need to control myself. So the point I'm trying to make is will skill chill anedani nenu I'm actually nowadays just 2 weeks kitame స్టార్ట్ చేశాను. ఒక ఇన్స్టా గోస్ట్ టైప్ లో స్టార్ట్ చేశాను. సండేస్ నాడు ఈ 3 విషయాల గురించి మాట్లాడతాను. విల్ స్కిల్ చిల్ అండ్ I know all the problems I have faced them, which is perfectionism problem. Every day I faced it, but then I still wrote the book for whatever it is worth. So it was pre-COVID, but then I call COVID as the biggest transition of humanity. So just a small attempt to break the blockages in along will, which is the determination that we have. I mean, sometimes we are very determined, sometimes we get into a trough. So all that.
Okay. So I want to call upon Lakshmikant garu for the question.
నమస్తే సార్. నా పేరు లక్ష్మీకాంత్ అండి. నేను బై ప్రొఫెషన్ హోమియోపతి వైద్యుడిని. నా వయసు 47 సంవత్సరాలు. మీ ప్రసంగానికి కొంచెం లేటుగా హాజరయ్యాను, క్షమించాలి. ప్రొఫెసర్ గారికి, కిరణ్ గారికి, పెద్ద తులసిదాస్ గారికి, ఇక్కడ ఉన్న ఇతర చదువులకి, కామేశ్వర మేడం గారు, అనుభవజ్ఞులకి అందరికీ నమస్కారం. నా ప్రశ్న బిహేవియరల్ సైన్సెస్ కు సంబంధించింది కాదు, కానీ ఈ ఫిలాసఫీకి సంబంధించింది సార్. నేను కాలేజీకి వెళ్తున్నప్పుడు ఓ పంట నా ముందే చూస్తుంటాను, నాట్లు వేస్తుంటారు, ఎదుగుతుంది, 4 నెలల్లో పెద్దదవుతుంది, పండుతుంది, 5వ నెలలో కోసేస్తారు, కుప్పలేసేస్తారు. అలాగే మా తోటలో పువ్వు వస్తుంది, పెద్దదవుతుంది, 1 రోజు 2 రోజుల్లో దాని జీవితం గడిచిపోతుంది. సచ్ ఏ షార్ట్ లైఫ్. మనకి 100 సంవత్సరాలు ఉన్నాయి. ఈ 100 సంవత్సరాలు వాట్ ఈజ్ ద పర్పస్ ఆఫ్ అవర్ ఎగ్జిస్టెన్స్ ఏంటి అని చెప్పి అనేది ఒక సమస్య తొలిచేస్తుంది. అది ప్రొఫెషన్ వైజ్ గానా, స్టడీస్ వైజ్ గానా, సర్వింగ్ పీపులా, దీనికి ఆన్సర్ దొరక్క పిల్లల్ని కంటామా, 2 పిల్లల్ని కన్నాను, డబ్బులు సంపాదించుకున్నాను, చదువుకున్నాను, ప్రొఫెషన్ లో జనాలకు సేవ చేస్తున్నాను, కానీ ఇంకా ఏదో మిగిలిపోయిందే అని అన్నట్టు అనిపిస్తుంది. అసలు ఏంటి, ఎందుకు ఇంత ప్రొలాంగ్డ్ లైఫ్ ఉంటుంది? దీని గురించి ఏమైనా ఇన్పుట్ ఇవ్వగలుగుతారా? ఎటు వెళ్ళాలి?
సార్, you asked me the toughest. I don't have a satisfactory answer, sir. But I will tell you one thing that I'm reminded of when I see this question that is expressed. ఇది ఫోటో ఉంది సార్. ఫోటో దాని పేరు పేల్ బ్లూ డాట్, చూసే ఉంటాం. ఇట్ ఈస్ అంటే మన శాటిలైట్ పంపించారు సార్ మన వాళ్ళు, నాసా. అది ఎంతో దూరం పోయిన తర్వాత ఒక యూనివర్స్ ఫోటో తీసి దాంట్లో మన అర్త్ అనేది ఇట్ ఈస్ లైక్ ఎ స్పెక్ ఆఫ్ డస్ట్ అన్నమాట. మేబీ కిరణ్ గారు, మేబీ యూ కెన్ పుల్ ఇట్ అవుట్ ఆఫ్ ది ఇంటర్నెట్. ఇట్స్ కాల్డ్ పేల్ బ్లూ డాట్. దాని గురించి కార్ల్ సేగన్ గారు ఏది రాశారో నేను మీకు ఒకసారి చదివినిపిస్తాను సార్. ఇట్స్ అ వెరీ ఇంట్రెస్టింగ్ కార్ల్ సేగన్ ది maybe I can even show you the picture, sir. Shall I show you the picture, sir?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
This is the picture, sir, of the universe. దాంట్లో మీకు చిన్న చుక్కగా కనిపిస్తుంది.
Yes.
That is the planet.
Yes, this I saw it in recent past. Somewhere.
Carl Sagan ani, he's a great cosmologist. అతను ఏమన్నాడో మీకు అది చదివి వినిపిస్తాను సార్. ఇట్స్ అ వెరీ ఇంట్రెస్టింగ్ థింగ్. ఇఫ్ యూ విల్ అలౌ మీ టు షేర్ దట్, I will just read it out for you. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam.
It's about,
Yeah.
అయితే అది చూస్తే మనకు అట్లీస్ట్ ఇట్ గివ్స్ మీ సెన్స్ ఆఫ్ పర్పస్ ఇన్ లైఫ్ అనే క్వశ్చన్ అడిగితే, ఆఫ్టర్ సీయింగ్ దట్ ఐ వండర్ ఇఫ్ రియలీ, ఐ మీన్, if we can ever answer that question. See, that description by Carl Sagan describes a million types of purposes for every hunter, every forager, every mother, every father, every person in love lived on that little speck of dust. And that little speck of dust is completely inconsequential. And if every speck of, if we are all inconsequential, then what do you mean by purpose, Andy?
absolutely.
Sir, Lakshmikant garu.
Sir, vintunnanu sir.
I see. I mean, given the the absolutely inconsequential nature of our existence, would only suggest that whatever purpose that we have is really, I mean, in the larger scheme of things, is nothing, Andy. I don't know. So to chase after that purpose may also be meaning. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, Andy. But that's but the point is, I think it's a good idea to be humbled every now and then by our inconsequentiality when we start thinking about purpose.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's
yeah. It's a big question actually.
Yeah. So Suresh Kumar garu, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Pawan garu.
పవన్ గారు చెప్పిన సమాధానానికి నాకు కూడా ఒకటి గుర్తొచ్చింది. యాక్చువల్లీ నేను లాంగ్ బ్యాక్ ఒక సోషల్ మీడియాలో ఒక ఇమేజ్ చూసాను. ఎక్కువ అంటే గుర్తింపు కోసం అండ్ రిలీజన్ కోసం అండ్ దేవుడి కోసం ఇంకా కష్టాల కోసం ఎక్కువ కష్టాలు పడుతూ మీరు ఇదైపోతున్నప్పుడు ఒకసారి గుర్తించుకోండి, ఈ అనంత విశ్వంలో యువర్ హియర్, యువర్ జస్ట్ హియర్ అని చిన్న ఇమేజ్ చూపిస్తుంటారు. అది గుర్తొచ్చింది సార్. అది పంచుకోవడం నుంచి నాకు
రైట్, థ్యాంక్స్. సురేష్ కుమార్ గారు మాట్లాడండి.
నమస్కారం అండి, వినిపిస్తుందండి?
వినిపిస్తాం.
ఓకే, థ్యాంక్ యూ పవన్ గారు, ఇట్ వాస్ వెరీ ఎన్లైటింగ్ సెషన్. నా ప్రశ్న ఏంటంటే, ఇందాక మంకీ వీడియో ఉంది కదండి, సో అక్కడ మనకి ఆ మంకీలకి ముందుగానే గ్రేప్స్ స్వీటర్ ఆర్ బెటర్ రివార్డ్ అని తెలియజేయడం వల్ల ఆ ఇన్ఈక్వాలిటీకి రివార్డ్ చేసి ఉండొచ్చు కదా. అదర్వైజ్ ద రోల్స్ ఆర్ రివర్స్. లైక్ ముందు మీరు గ్రేప్స్ ఇచ్చిండి, తర్వాత మీరు క్యూకంబర్ ఇచ్చుంటే అది ఆ బిహేవియర్ అంటే ఇంకొక ఏదైతే క్యూకంబర్ వచ్చిందో అది రివోల్ట్ చేసేదా, లేకపోతే ఇక్కడ ఓన్లీ డిఫరెన్సెస్ ఆఫ్ ఓకే ఫస్ట్ రివోల్ట్ చేసేదా? ఎందుకంటే ఇక్కడ రివార్డ్ మ్యాటర్స్ అనేది, అంటే ఇన్జస్టిస్ కి ఫైట్ మనం ఆల్వేజ్ చేస్తామా అనేది క్వశ్చన్ అన్నమాట.
Good question, sir. My hypothesis, sir, is that the monkey would have revolted with greater ferocity. Now you might wonder why. The monkey would have reacted with greater ferocity on account of a phenomena called loss aversion, sir. Loss aversion అర్థం ఏంటంటే, let me explain. మీకు 100 రూపాయలు ఇచ్చినాను అనుకోండి, దాంతో మీకు ఒక అంతు వరకు సంతోషం కలుగుతుంది. నేను సపోజింగ్ instead of giving you 100 rupees, I took away 100 rupees from you. It causes a certain amount of unhappiness. Loss aversion ఏమంటుందంటే, the amount of unhappiness that you suffer for an equivalent amount of loss as a gain is much higher than the pleasure that you would gain for that amount. ఈ పెన్ నాకు ఇస్తే నాకు ఎంత సంతోషం అవుతుందో, ఈ పెన్ తీసేస్తే దానికంటే ఎక్కువ లాస్ అవర్షన్ అంటారు సార్. జిమ్మీ కార్నర్స్ ఒక స్టేట్మెంట్ అన్నాడు సార్, ఏమని, దట్ ఐ హేట్ లూజింగ్ మోర్ దెన్ ఐ లవ్ విన్నింగ్. ఇట్ క్యాప్చర్స్ దట్ ఇదన్నమాట. సో నౌ ఇఫ్ ఇన్ ద మంకీ ఎక్స్పెరిమెంట్ యూ స్టార్ట్ ఆఫ్ విత్ గ్రేప్స్ and you withdraw the grape and give it a cucumber, loss aversion will kick in and it will react even more ferociously, only reiterating or reinforcing the view that the sense of justice will be, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Next, Kameswari garu.
నమస్కారం అండి. ఇది ప్లెజర్ పెయిన్ గురించే నేను మాట్లాడేది. అయితే ఇది ఫిలాసఫికల్ బ్యాక్గ్రౌండ్ తో ఉంది. చిన్నప్పటి నుంచి నాకు ఊహ తెలిసినప్పటి నుంచి కూడా ప్రతిరోజు పడుకునే ముందు ఇది నేను ఎక్కడ నేర్చుకున్నది కాదు. మేబీ మై చైల్డ్హుడ్, ఫ్రమ్ మై చైల్డ్హుడ్ ఐ ఇంట్రాస్పెక్ట్ ఎవ్రీడే. ఇవాళ నేను చాలా ఎక్కువ పెయిన్ వస్తాయి, ఎందుకు వచ్చింది నేను ఆలోచించి, ఈ పెయిన్ నుంచి నేను రిలీఫ్ అవ్వడానికి ఏం చేయాలి అని ఆలోచించి అది చేసేస్తాను. ఇంకా మళ్ళా నేను ఆ విషయం గురించి బాధపడను. ఇది అలాగ మొదలైంది ఇప్పటిదాకా చాలా విషయాల్లో. అలాగే ఒకవేళ ఎక్కడన్నా మనం బ్యాడ్ గా రియాక్ట్ అయితే ప్రతిరోజు రాత్రి పడుకునే ముందు ఒక ఆలోచన, చాలా పెయిన్ కలిగినప్పుడు ఇందులో నా బాధ్యత ఎంత అనేది ఆలోచించుకోవడం, అది ఒక అలవాటుగా ఉంది. ఇలా మీరు చెప్పిన కోతి ఇన్సిడెంట్ లో అక్కడ నాకు ప్రాప్తం అనేది ఒకటి పెట్టుకుంటాను ఫిలాసఫీ. మనకి ప్రాప్తమైనది మనకు వస్తుంది, మనకి ప్రాప్తం లేనిది మనకి రాదు, కాబట్టి చింత లేదు. ఎంత చదువుకున్నా మనకి ఏ రివార్డ్ రాకపోయినా మనం రాసేది రాస్తాం, మనం చేసేది చేస్తాం, అది ఒకటి. కానీ సిబ్లింగ్స్ దగ్గరికి వచ్చేసరికి పోటీ పడ్డం అనేది ఒకటి ఉంటుంది. ప్రపంచంలో ఎవరికి ఏదొచ్చినా బాధ లేదు, కానీ సిబ్లింగ్స్ కి అది కూడా వాళ్ళు సంపాదించుకుంటే బాధ లేదు, కానీ పేరెంట్స్ ఏదైనా మనకంటే వాళ్ళకి ఎక్కువ చేస్తే మాత్రం పెయిన్ వస్తుంది. ఇది కూడా నేను ఇంట్రాస్పెక్ట్ చేసుకొని తెలుసుకున్న విషయం ఏంటంటే, ఓకే వీ షుడ్ యాక్సెప్ట్ దే ఆర్ మోర్ లవబుల్ దాన్ మీ అండ్ వాళ్ళు దే ఆర్ మోర్ స్వీటర్ దాన్ మీ, సో ఐ డిజర్వ్ దిస్ ఓన్లీ. అక్కడ కూడా పెయిన్ పోతుంది, నాకు అక్కడ కూడా ప్రాబ్లం రావట్లే. ఎక్కడ ప్రాబ్లం వస్తుందంటే, నేను రిలేషన్స్ ఏర్పడేటప్పుడు కూడా ఎవ్రీడే ఐ చెకప్ వీళ్ళతో నాకు రిలేషను ఎందుకు ఉంది, ఎంత ఉండాలి, ఇందులో ఎక్కడ మనకి పెయిన్ వస్తుంది, ఎక్కడ మనం తగ్గాలి, ఎక్కడ మనం రిట్రా అయిపోతే మనకు ఆ పెయిన్ రాదు, అది చూసుకుంటూ ఉంటాం. అలా అన్ఎక్స్పెక్టెడ్, అసలు వీళ్ళతో నేనేమి ఎక్స్పెక్ట్ చేయకూడదు అనుకుని మొదలు పెట్టుకున్న రిలేషన్స్ అవి పెయిన్ఫుల్ అవుతున్నాయి. ఎందువల్ల అవుతున్నాయి అంటే, వాళ్ళు వెన్నుపోటు పొడిస్తారు. నేను వీళ్ళ దగ్గర నుంచి ఏమీ ఎక్స్పెక్ట్ చేయట్లా, కానీ దే ఆర్ స్టాబింగ్ మీ బ్యాక్. నేను ఎక్స్పెక్ట్ చేయకపోయినా ఇది జరుగుతుంది. ఈ పెయిన్ నుంచి నేను బయటికి రాలేకపోతున్నాను. ఈ పెయిన్ నుంచి బయటికి రాదు. ఇది ఒక పెయిన్ కి సంబంధించిన ప్రశ్న. ఇది రెండవ ప్రశ్న ఏంటంటే, లిటరలీ ఎన్నిసార్లు చెక్ చేసుకున్నా కూడా ఎక్స్పెక్టెడ్ నథింగ్ ఫ్రమ్ దెమ్, ఎన్ని సంవత్సరాల నుంచి కూడా రిలేషన్ లో. ఓకే, రెండోది ఏంటంటే, నేను ఒకసారి మా గురువు గారి ఇంటికి వెళ్ళాను. గురువు గారి ఇంటికి ఒక 10 ఏళ్ల తర్వాత వెళ్ళాను. నేను వాళ్ళ ఇంట్లో పిల్లలు అప్పుడే పుట్టిన పిల్లల్ని నేను చూశాను. అలాంటిది నేను వాళ్ళందరూ యూనివర్సిటీలో చదువుకునే టైంకి వెళ్ళాను. నేను ఒక్కొక్క పిల్లని చూస్తుంటే నాకు వచ్చింది ఆనందం. అలాంటి ఆనందం కాదు ప్రపంచం. నేను ఏది అచీవ్ చేసినా నాకు అంత ఆనందం రాలేదు. ఆ పిల్లల్ని, ఒక్కొక్క పిల్లల్ని చూస్తుంటే వాళ్ళు ఇచ్చేస్తున్నారు, వాళ్ళు వచ్చేస్తున్నారు అని చెప్తుంటే, వీళ్ళతో నాకు ఏం సంబంధం లేదు. వాళ్ళు నా గురువు గారి పిల్లలు. వాళ్ళందరినీ నేను వాళ్ళ ఇన్ఫాక్ట్ మనవాళ్ళు వాళ్ళందరినీ నేను ఒకళ్ళ తర్వాత ఒకళ్ళని ఒక ఫంక్షన్ లో చూసి, వీళ్ళు ఇంత పెద్ద వాళ్ళు అయిపోయారు, వీళ్ళు ఇంత అచీవ్ చేశారు, వాళ్ళంతా అచీవ్ చేశారు అంటే నాకు అసలు పట్టరాని ఆనందం. ఆ రోజు రాత్రి నిద్ర కూడా పట్టనంత ఆనందం వచ్చింది. ఈ పెయిన్, ఈ ప్లెజర్, దీనికి నాకు వెనకాల ఏమీ రీజన్స్ కనిపించట్లేదు. ఇది మీరు దీనిలోకి తీసుకొస్తారు చెప్పండి.
వెరీ టఫ్ క్వశ్చన్ అమ్మా. బట్ మీరు ఒక పాయింట్ రేజ్ చేశారు, అది నాకు చాలా నచ్చింది. ఏంటంటే, 2 స్పియర్స్ ఉంటాయండి. ఒక స్పియర్ ఏంటంటే, మనము దాని మీద కంట్రోల్ ఉండదు. వి కాంట్ డూ ఎనీథింగ్ అబౌట్ ఇట్.
yes
the other sphere is where we have a sense of agency. ఒక ప్రేయర్ కూడా ఉంది. ఏంటంటే, దేవుడా నాకు ఏంటంటే కంట్రోల్ ఉన్న స్పియర్ లో నాకు అది చేసే శక్తి ఇవ్వండి, కంట్రోల్ లేని స్పియర్ లో గివ్ మీ ద విజ్డమ్ టు రిజైన్, టు సరెండర్, and to have the ability to distinguish between these 2 spheres. And it is the ultimate form of human wisdom. If you start exercising control in a sphere where you don't have control, that is a cause of anxiety. It causes all kinds of health problems. That is one consequence, where one sphere spills over into the other. And if you are reticent and passive in a sphere where you should be exercising control, then that also is a bad thing. So dividing these 2 things becomes a critical thing among that's and ఆ శక్తి నాకు లేదు. నేను ఇంకా నేర్చుకోవాలి. కానీ మీరు ఒక మాట అన్నారు కదా, వెన్నుపోటు పొడిస్తే పెయిన్ వచ్చిందని. ఏం ఎక్స్పెక్టేషన్ లేదు, తప్పది. మీరు ఎక్స్పెక్టేషన్ ఉండే, మీకు you had an expectation of fairness, and that is an expectation of fairness.
వాళ్ళు నన్ను వెన్నుపోటు పొడవకూడదు అని.
But the tragedy of life ఏంటంటే, to even not have that expectation in society is the tragedy of life. The tragedy is that we can't even expect equity and fairness from others. It has become a state of affairs, and that is a very crippling reflection of our society. That we have come to a point where we can't even expect fairness. And if we in fact create that expectation in ourselves and suffer because of that, దానికంటే ఎక్కువ ట్రాజడీ లేదండి. It's a massive tragedy. Yeah, but I don't have an answer to your question, Amma. I mean, you have far more wisdom than I do. I'm still learning. You have seen more behavior than I have. I'm just starting my journey in understanding. మీరు ఎంత అర్థం చేసుకున్నారు, నాకు నా అనుభవం అంత లేదు. So I can't.
అంత లేదండి.
సో మీరు అన్నది పవన్ గారు, మీరు అన్న సెరెనిటీ ప్రేయర్ కదా, గ్రాంట్ మీ ద సెరెనిటీ టు యాక్సెప్ట్ థింగ్స్ ఐ కెనాట్ చేంజ్, కరేజ్ టు చేంజ్ ద థింగ్స్ ఐ క్యాన్, అండ్ విజ్డమ్ టు నో ద డిఫరెన్స్. ఇట్స్ అ బ్యూటిఫుల్ థింగ్.
Sir, I have a related question. Hello, can I speak?
Yeah, చెప్పండి.
Actually, I've done it too. Actually, I just put it in the chat also little earlier. While we understand the behavioral science, especially in your current role, can work in the areas of fairness, justice, policy making, and all that. How does it work in behavioral science help in relationships? I think that is one of the points I think the previous lady also asked.
In relation,
how does one, ante with siblings or gani, wife to gani, like a few people who matter to us, even if we like or don't like them, how does this science help? I mean, are there any principles we can use?
ఇదే పాయింట్ మీద మీనా ఆల్సో మే హ్యావ్ ఎ క్వశ్చన్. మీనా, నువ్వు కూడా అడుగుతావా? ఒకసారి చెప్తారు పవన్ గారు.
అది అలాంటి క్వశ్చన్ నిజానికి. నాకు ఇంకొక చిన్న విషయం ఏంటి అంటే, క్యూరియాసిటీ ఏంటంటే, మగాళ్ళు ఎందుకు అంత హ్యాపీగా ఎక్కువగా ఉంటారు, ఆడవాళ్ళు ఎందుకు సాడ్ గా ఉంటారు? Why we bother too much about everything?
No, it's okay.
We are overburdened. We are overburdened. That's the problem.
No, you're over. There's no question about it. But the first part of the question, what is the scope of using behavior science to inform human relationships? That's a very good question.
Yeah,
it's a serious question. There is a whole branch of social sciences that seeks to understand the nature of human relationships. And in particular, it's an applied field. It's called negotiations, conflict resolution, and mediation. And a subject undi. Chala research chestar. Behavior, Max Bazerman ani, Howard Rife ani, villandaru దాంట్లో చాలా empirical data collect చేశారు. One of the critical learnings from that area, which helps us understand relationships better and how relationships can perhaps be made even better, is to think about how people fail in arriving at relationships. Let me give you, so there are two paradigms. One paradigm is called distributive negotiations అంటారు. A distributive negotiation, ఇప్పుడు మా అమ్మ ఇప్పుడు మార్కెట్కి వెళ్ళేది, and she would bargain for some chilies, tomato. వాడు ₹2 అంటే మా అమ్మ రూపాయి అనేది. The guy would come to 175, my mother would come to 150. It would equilibrate at some price, and they would settle on a price, and there would be a transaction. That's a form of a relationship. It's a transactional relationship. Now, in this, the critical thing to understand in a distributive relationship is there is a finite element, and the more I gain from that, the less that you get, and the more you gain from that, the less that I get. You need to fix some bias on top. Let us say you and I need to, a husband and wife need to divide up responsibilities. The more responsibilities the husband takes up, the lesser responsibilities for the wife. The more responsibilities that the wife takes up, the lesser responsibilities for the husband. It's a fixed amount of time, fixed resources. But that is a kind of a bias. And that bias can lead to conflict. Because our imagination is paralyzed. And when our imagination gets paralyzed, we begin to think of things as being finite. There's an alternative paradigm called integrative negotiation. Imagine two people, A and B. They are trying to divide an orange. Pandu. There are various ways of dividing that fruit. ఒక విధానం ఏంటంటే దాన్ని సగంలో కోయడము, కొట్లాడతారు ఇద్దరు. నాకు ఎక్కువ కావాలంటే నాకు ఎక్కువ కావాలి, ఓడంటాడు నాకు ఆరెంజ్ ఎక్కువ ఇష్టం, నీకు తక్కువ ఇష్టం. So they get into a discussion of how to divide that orange, and it leads to a conflict. But now let us say those two individuals were to have a conversation with each other and go beyond their stated preferences. A stated preference ఏంది, నాకు ఆరెంజ్ కావాలి. ఆ stated preference కంటే బియాండ్ పోయి, why does that person require an orange అనే ఎంక్వైరీ చేస్తే, supposing you discover that one of them wants only the pulp of the orange and the other person wants the skin of the orange, and they divide it according to that requirement, then both of them are much happier than they would have been had they been in a distributive mindset. In other words, what you have done is you moved from one type of a discussion of stated preference to real reasons, and discovered that you can actually make compromises and the other person can make compromises on things that they don't value all that very much, and trade in the opposites with a view to expanding the size of the pie, then both are better off. So a lot of human relationships, I think, can be made better off if you can move them from a conflictual, adversarial mindset of a zero-sum game to a system where you're trying to enlarge the size of the pie and have more for each other. And that kind of a cooperative relationship is a better thing. It's a Pareto optimal position. So that's one potential way in which you can use behavior science to try and repair relationships. I mean, huge conflicts. I mean, you take a Kashmir conflict, unquote. You take the Palestine-Israel conflict, unquote. If you can apply the behavior, the integrative approach, you might actually be able to resolve those conflicts. So I think there is potential, at least a limited potential, that behavior science has to fix relationships. But that's a separate application itself. Let me pause there, and I don't want to lecture on that, but that's a sort of a long answer to a small question.
But Professor, మీరు మంచి point చెప్పారండి, because it's a neat segue into one of the things I told the audience before the meeting started, that ఒక situation లో, ఒక experiment లో మీరు ఇద్దరు IAS ఆఫీసర్ దంపతులు దెబ్బలాడుతున్నారని చెప్పారు ఇస్తారా? అది that was a distributed negotiation case study కదా, అది దాని గురించి కొంచెం చెప్తారా?
నేను ఇది సిమ్యులేషన్ చేస్తానండి క్లాస్ లో. సో ఇది సిమ్యులేషన్ ఏంటంటే, ఇట్స్ two people are given two roles and they have to perform that role అన్నమాట. Merger business negotiation అన్నమాట. ఎంతో మంది స్టూడెంట్స్ తో ఆట ఆడిపిస్తాను అన్నమాట. So I had an IAS couple and I got them to negotiate with each other, and they got into a fight, Andy. And not because they're an IAS. I'm sure there are a lot of couples who would have fought. But the thing is, so it's interesting. It's interesting that sometimes proximity can lead to greater conflict than easier settlement. And that is again a paradox. ఇప్పుడు కామేశ్వర్ గారు అన్నారు కదా, ఇద్దరు సిబ్లింగ్స్ ఉంటే the likelihood of them fighting is higher than two strangers fighting. It's in some situations at least. The reason is that the demand for equity is so much higher among people who know each other, that leads to conflict. Sometimes you need to be able to make a compromise. You need to be able to give up something in the larger interest of peace. You can't get peace in a costless manner. Peace can come at a price, and the price can be inequality sometimes. So if there is a trade-off being made between unfairness and peace, and you realize that peace is a higher virtue than unfairness, then you might want to go for peace. But if unfairness is of a more higher premium than peace, then unfairness should be avoided. So there are a lot of trade-offs, but husband and wife, I mean, there must have been a predisposition to fight. Because they know each other so well. So, and both are powerful people. Both are very powerful people. IAS officers, and
sir, if I may share this Mahabharata example where at a distributed sharing antunar kada, basically the situation where both Duryodhana and Arjun are there, and one of them have to be, 10,000 Sena versus a person who cannot fight. So obviously, basically, both of them value that proposition very differently, and that's why both of them thought that both of them were winners.
Correct.
Yeah, so this is a fantastic example of integrative negotiation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I love that example, and I will use it with your permission. I will use it.
Of course. This was actually already used by me by many years ago in a training situation only. Training is meant for learning only.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful.
సో ఇది సమయం 1:10 అయింది. థ్యాంక్ యూ సో మచ్ అండి పవన్. యూ బీన్ వెరీ జనరస్ విత్ యువర్ టైం. ఇది పవన్ గారి సెషన్ ఒక శాంపుల్ మాత్రమే. ఈ ఆనందాన్ని మేము సరి ఆ కోర్సులో ఉన్న కోర్సులో పార్టిసిపేట్ చేసినంత కాలం పొందాము. తర్వాత ఈ పవన్ గారు బెంగళూరు బిహేవియరల్ సైన్స్ ఆలమ్నాయ్ తోటి కూడా ఒక సెషన్ చేశారు. సో హీస్ వెరీ వెరీ జనరస్ విత్ హిస్ టైం. థ్యాంక్ యూ సో మచ్ సార్. ఐఎమ్ షూర్ ఆడియన్స్ అంతా కూడా చాలా అంటే పార్టిసిపేషన్ ఎంగేజ్మెంట్ లెవెల్ చూస్తుంటే అర్థమవుతుంది. దే హ్యాడ్ they consider the time well spent అని. But I know thank you so much for your any closing comments. Me and she will take it and we'll close the session.
No, I'm first of all I'm very grateful. It's a very enlightened group, and Kiran garu you've been an inspiration because of this platform that you created, and it is a phenomenal platform, and anybody who builds a community like this or a community based on scholarship it's noble work, and it's God's work. So I'm really grateful to you, and I'm grateful to all the participants for indulging me, and I'm grateful, and please stay in touch. I'm happy to meet all of you, and someday we will meet in person. Thank you very much.
తప్పకుండా మీరు పంపిస్తున్న లింక్స్ షేరింగ్ లెర్నింగ్ మెటీరియల్ కూడా నాకు పంపిస్తే రేపు ఒక ఈమెయిల్ వెళ్తుందండి టు ద లార్జర్ దాక్షిభాష గ్రూప్. దాంట్లో అంటే ఈ సెషన్ గురించి మాట్లాడుతూ ఆ లింక్స్ కూడా నేను షేర్ చేస్తాను. తర్వాత నేను సహ వ్యవస్థాపకుడినే. మొదట వ్యవస్థాపకులు తులసిదాస్ గారు, మా నాన్నగారు. ఈజ్ ఆల్సో పార్టిసిపేటెడ్ ఇన్ దిస్.
I did see him and sir.
So ఆయన దాసు భాష.
You have a wonderful son, sir. It's a great honor that you are a part of this. We need your blessings. Thank you very much.
థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్. అందరికి కూడా ధన్యవాదాలండి. ఇంకో సెషన్ లో మళ్ళీ కలుద్దాం వచ్చే నెల దాసు భాష ప్రసంగ సెషన్ లో. ధన్యవాదాలు. థ్యాంక్ యూ.
Thank you. Great session. Yeah.